So the big question for me is to see how realistic it is to replace the CCV without taking out the intake manifold. And then I was able to pull out the CCV valve from the car. So there we go. CCV valve removed. Intake manifold not removed. So while you're in there, can you see the slight oil leak that I have at the back of the venous pipe? Just those two washers that need replaced. Might as well change that out. And what that means is we can't put the CCV back together until I get those washers. We await the arrival of the washers and we can finish this job once and for all. Just a bit of blue paper covering up the open holes. Not forgetting the oil sump still down there and soaked up a little bit of oil since we installed it. But we have a few other jobs to get on with. With the dipstick tube now completely painted, all the rust removed, we can now pull out the bits of shop tile that I used to protect the insides from being painted. So we're going to give the throttle body a bit of a clean. That's the inside and that's the outside. Here we have some throttle valve cleaner. Wow, that didn't take much. So the idle control valve is still pretty clean from last time I cleaned it. You can see the valve rotating quite easily. That's a good sound. And now we'll give the DISA flap a little spritz as well. first thing we need to do is transfer this rubber bung from the old oil separator to the new one. And before we do that, we'll just take off the old pipes. Bit of practice as well for putting the new ones on. So this top one twists and pulls, and this bottom one, it's a squeeze and pull. That seems to be easier said than done, but it does work. And now we can start to see there was a little bit of blockage forming in the old separator. So we'll take this apart later on and see how bad it actually was. So now we pull off the bung off the old CCV port, and we'll transfer that to the new one. There's the part number of the new oil separator, and here's the port that we need to bung up. So now what we're going to attempt to do is take apart the old oil separator and see just how badly clogged it really was. You can see there's a bit of debris in there. So let's first take off this panel. It looks like it's just clipped in, and then the venturi section, I think I'm just going to grind it in half, because obviously no one got use for this. So just slowly starting to pull it apart. There's a spring inside, so just be careful it doesn't hit you in the face. Okay, so we have all the clips off now. Okay, so that's the cover plate. This looks like the diaphragm, and then there's the spring inside. If we look at the diaphragm itself, yeah, I have to say it's quite heavy. I mean, it's not like hard to hold, but you can feel the weight of the oil, and obviously this is all oil residue. I think it was worth changing for sure. Plenty of residue in here as well. Now what I'm going to try and do is cut the venturi in half like I mentioned, but I'm not sure how neat I'm going to be, but let's give it a go. Yeah, so it looks like the vapor goes in here and ends up in the middle, and then somehow these chambers must be connected somehow, and the oil must swirl, or the vapor must swirl, so the diaphragm must allow vapor to escape through this tube and back into the air intake. You can see a fair amount of debris. Yeah, so it looks like the inlet actually is fed into this chamber, and then it must spiral, this venturi effect. If you look in this inlet, it's actually only connected to the last chamber, so this larger chamber here, and then it must go into this circular section, passes through all those chambers, which helps to separate the vapor and the liquid. The liquid then drains through the bottom, and the vapor then rises through this tube into the diaphragm. I think it was definitely worth changing. There's quite a lot of build up here, but this is at least 19 years worth of use, 120,000 miles roughly. Yeah, you can see these chambers are all starting to get a bit clogged. That's the other half. Yeah, you can see the vapor channel is quite clogged. Yeah, there's plenty of debris in here. The central part of the oil separator is full of debris. Thought that was an interesting exercise to have a better understanding what the inside of the oil separator looks like. So let's grab the new one and get it fitted after I clean up all this mess. And here's the first pipe that we're going to connect to the oil separator. So I'm going to put a little bit of silicone grease on the O-ring. That'll just help the pipe a little bit when we're putting it onto the oil separator. There's an O-ring on both ends, and this pipe will go on here. This is the one that rotates. So putting a little bit of silicone on here will stop the O-ring getting damaged. So with a little bit of practice, you can see the silicone is spread quite nicely, and that will just help the process when assembling it under the intake manifold. So now let's move to the car and start assembling this into the engine bay. So the oil separator sits under the intake manifold where we removed it. And this pipe then, once it's rotated, will sit like this, and this will be connecting to the air distribution manifold. So we have to get this pipe in first to snake it in, and then we'll bring this one in, and as we bring this in, we'll try and line these two up, and then we have to twist this one this way, and we'll try and twist this one this way. And basically the action of opposite twisting under the intake manifold, and then once connected, that will sit like this. So let's give that a go. It's definitely easier said than done. So this T-piece is getting a little bit in the way, and basically I just have to try and fingle this in somehow to get that past some of the intake manifold, so that it would be sitting like this in its position. So let me show you what it is that I'm doing. So what we need to do, this pipe needs to somehow fit through this gap, trying to get the T-piece past part of the intake manifold. So let's see if I can show you this one-handed. So this pipe has to fit inside this gap, but this T-piece also needs to come through the same gap. Is this possible? I wonder, can we do it from the other way around? Okay. In Jason's video, I think he shows it coming up from underneath, but obviously here we've seen that it might be easier to come from above. I think that's probably the best way to get that pipe in, and then it will snake down into the CCV valve, which will be located there. So we're trying to get the oil separator. This part of the oil separator will screw onto that pipe, and then we'll get connected onto the air distribution block. So let's put you back on the tripod and see now how we can get all this together. So I'm feeding the oil separator in, connecting to that pipe, and then twisting them together. So we have success. The pipe is now connected to the oil separator. I'll try and set up the light to be able to show you how I did it. So basically the pipe was in place, oil separator came in, and I basically twisted them together, and I was able to lock them into place. You can see the oil separator and the pipe are now firmly attached, and I just had to twist this and hold the pipe at the same time, and I was able to lock them into place. So now we can position the oil separator roughly where it sits, and now this pipe should be free to be connected. So the oil separator's in and it's loose. Now I'm going to slip this pipe onto the part of the intake manifold, and then we should just be able to push that on, and that's now that clicked into place. This pipe is now connected, and it snakes underneath the intake manifold onto the oil separator. Then we connect the next connection, which you can see here, and that pipe will snake up and be fitted onto the cam cover, and then the third pipe will be the oil drain to the dipstick. So the next pipe is the one running from the rocker cover underneath the intake manifold to the valve, the oil separator valve once again. So let's get this open. This part will connect to here, and this one with the angle, the 45-degree angle, not the 90-degree, that will go onto the oil separator valve, and we will have to snake it down through there like so. So let me bring you down underneath to have a quick look there. EVAP solenoid will just sit there, and that will then connect onto there, which we'll probably do first because the oil separator is still loose. Once that's connected, then we can clip it in at the top. So 45-degree end is the one going on to the oil separator, so we'll put a little bit of silicone in there to help the assembly, not too much. And the other end should be easy enough to clip in to the cam cover. So we're feeding behind the oil filter housing here, underneath the EVAP, and this is just a push fit. Hopefully you heard that click. And I'll bring you down to show you what that looks like. And then that click you heard was me snapping that onto the oil separator. And everything's still loose. A little bit of flexibility then in trying to connect this pipe onto the oil separator. And now we'll just connect this one. I do remember to take off the paper that we put in to stop anything going in. Before we make the final connection, I'll just give the inside of the pipe a quick clean out. And you can see it was starting to get quite clogged. This is some of the gunk we took out of the outlet of the rocker cover, just to get the worst of any potential clogging out. But just be careful not to push anything into the top of the engine, and just try and scrape it out. And now we should just be able to clip the pipe. And now the pipe from the rocker cover is connected to the oil separator. Now we're ready for the next pipe, and that's going to be connecting here, the T-piece. And it's bent 90 degrees, that's going to connect in back here, and then the 45-degree connector is going to clip into the T-piece. So this is the insulated pipe. I'm going to feed that in underneath. And we also have this electrical connector that we shouldn't forget about. So let's take him out, and the pipe go underneath all of those. That's it in place. So let's see if we can snap this in. The T-piece side. And this one is a little tricky. Oh dear, just torn some of the insulation. Mamma mia! I can see why Jason fitted it at an angle, because that is definitely tricky. There we go. So it does need to come out at a little bit of an angle. And we did tear a little bit. I don't think it will matter too much. But that's the pipe definitely snapped in. And now we have to snap in this other end. There we go. And we'll check. It's definitely in. I'll reconnect the connector. And that's the third pipe in. And just check each end if you can tug them off. And I cut. So there's the T-piece connector all the way to the air distribution connection. Here's the last pipe, and there's the bottom of the oil separator valve, and we'll connect this pipe, and we have to run it under this hard plastic pipe, which gives clearance then to refit the electric box. So let's get this opened. This is the oil drain pipe. This connector goes on to here, and we'll leave this end loose, and that goes underneath this hard plastic pipe, and this pipe will just hang out until we're ready to refit the oil dipstick tube. So we'll put a little bit of silicone on here like before, just to make life a little bit easier to reconnect this pipe onto the bottom of the oil separator. So remember, pipe goes underneath this hard plastic pipe, and the body, the valve body, is still loose, as you can see, and then that's it snapped into place. So now we're ready to refit the screws on the valve, the oil separator CCV valve. I'm not sure really what to call it, and that's what we're calling it today. So now we can screw the two screws to hold the body, the oil separator valve body, and that's the CCV system almost complete, and the last connection will be the oil drain. Let's get these screws in. I have to decide whether to use the new ones that I bought or reuse the old ones. Let's use the new ones. CCV separator completely installed. Pipe. There we go, there's the two pipes. So it is possible to change the CCV valve without removing the intake manifold. And now all we have to do is put everything back together and see if it still works. So now we're going to change out the throttle body gasket, just because we can, to be honest. It's still in pretty good shape, so it might be that you don't have to, but I don't think it was very expensive. Well, it looks like the orientation doesn't matter. You can see the new one is a little bit tighter. The old one has definitely grown in size over time. So that's the new one in. So let's get the throttle body installed in the car. Now the throttle body's in, we'll put the idle control valve, and it slots into this. And this boss with these two extensions slides into this rubber part here. And then two screws here and here. We'll keep that fixed in position. Throttle body and idle control valve now fitted. It's time for the EVAP solenoid, which we unhooked some time ago. And that's simply the line for it and route it underneath this harness. That's that hooked into place. Now to get prepared for connecting all the electrical connections back, we're going to try and put this control box, this electronics bracket, back into place. Now before we do that, you can see the mounting bracket just to the right of the throttle body. That has to go behind the throttle body connection, because if it goes in front, this cable will get trapped behind this bracket, and we don't want that. So remember from before, there's a stud just to the right of the throttle body where this bolts into. We're just going to plug in the throttle body electrical connection. So now we're sure that the cable can't get trapped. Bracket is now on the stud. I can feel it by hand. And now we just have to go and get the nut to secure it in place. So I kept everything reasonably organized, and here you can see these two screws are separate from these two nuts and the bolt, and that's because these three are for the electronics box bracket, these two are for the DISA flap. So I know these two nuts are what I need for the electronics box. One of them goes here, and the other one is down by the throttle body where I had to blindly hook onto the stud. And let's hope that I don't drop this nut into the engine bay. I was once told by a friend who works on cars that oh, look at that. With luck, I dropped it on the electrical box. Try and set the camera on its own so I can use both hands to get this nut on. So I'm doing this completely by feel because I can't actually see down here. So it's just a matter of trying to feel for the thread once you have it on the end of the stud, and I think we have it. Whew. Yeah, I was once told by a friend, a sign of a good mechanic is being able to work completely blindfolded. So I'm not completely blindfolded because I'm not a good mechanic. I'm not a mechanic at all. But that advice has always helped. So let's see if I can get the camera in to show you that. I have no idea if you can see that, but that's what it looks like. Definitely brought a bit of a sweat on. Okay, now it's time to plug in the electrical connectors. We've got these two nuts in temporarily, and I've left this bolt off just to give a bit of flexibility because we have a few connections to make. Idle control valve, EVAP Purge solenoid, then the oil filter single prong. The connectors are identical actually, except for the fact one has two prongs and one has one prong. You can see that's the two prong connector. That's where having a bit of movement in this helps. I'm thinking about disconnecting the alternator just to get better access, but let's see, maybe I can do it. I must go through my video footage to see how did I get this off, because I'm sure it wasn't this hard. I think I'm going to take the EVAP hose off. So, taking the EVAP hose and electrical connector off, it seems to be a bit more access. Yeah. So I needed to take the EVAP solenoid off again, just to be able to get that connector plugged in. Let's put the EVAP back. Connector. It's a bit easier when it's not hooked into its bracket. And then the last one is the oil two-pronged one. And that should feed in underneath everything that we fitted. So hopefully this one goes a bit more straightforward. Like so. So that's everything now back. We can start refitting the electrical box. So another way for me to confirm I plugged everything in is just to go through the labels, and then we grab our bolt and put the last connection of the electronics box in. So there's 3 fasteners in total, 1 bolt and 2 nuts. So let's get those tightened up. And it's very close to the bolt for the throttle body itself, and it's the same size, so just make sure you have both of them tightened and that you haven't tightened one too much. So, and that's the bolt for the throttle body. That's the electrical box now refitted. We've routed the harness. So now what we're going to do is refit the oil dipstick tube, which is down here. One nice benefit of filming everything is that you can see how it looked like before, especially when it comes to these clips, because I don't think I'd remember how they went back in. So this one was fitted that way around, and this one was fitted the other way around. Now, to remember that, me personally, I'd have had no chance. The other nice thing is you can see now the difference a little bit of rust treatment and paint makes. That's how it looked before, and that's how it looks now. So now we're ready to refit the dipstick, and first thing we have to do is remove the paper towel. How easy that is to remove. It's soaked up quite a bit of oil. Oops. New O-ring for the dipstick. This just gets slotted into that hole that we were looking at earlier. You just have to be mindful of all the pipes, not to trap anything, and then slot the pipe into the sump. You can just push the dipstick tube like so, and then give it a little bit of a press in to make sure the O-ring is seated. And with a slight push, the dipstick tube is into position. Now all we have to do now is connect the oil drain hose, which we left loose. It's this thing here, and that just slots onto the dipstick tube. So I'm just going to put a bit of silicone on the end of that to make that a little bit easier to slide in. That's the tube now into place, and then we just have to clip the fuel hose and the vacuum line into those clips. The screw to hold the dipstick tube will go in that hole there. Now pretty much most of the hard work is done. You can see now the dipstick tube is completely fitted with the oil drain and the clips for the fuel vacuum and the fuel pipe itself. Everything is now refitted. O-ring on the dipstick tube is seated, and now we just have to put the dipstick back in. And now we're ready to fit the air intake boot, and we have the main one going onto the throttle body and the small one for the idle control valve. So now we connect the air intake boot onto the main throttle body, and then the small pipe goes on to the idle control valve. It is a little bit tricky, to be honest, but persistence pays off. Idle control boot, and now the air intake boot is back in. Now we're ready for the DISA flap. And then just push it. That's the DISA installed. Then we just have to reconnect the vacuum line to the air intake boot. And we mustn't forget the DISA flap electrical connector. Just remember to take my label off. Then we just have the MAF connector, and again all the labelling made a good bit of difference around the bottom of the intake pipe. And now that's the last thing we need to connect. Refit the airbox. So here's the airbox, and this little clip here, that's actually used to support the harness, which is this rubber part here that actually clips in. Sometimes it can be easily forgotten. So let's just slide this into place. And there's that clip that I mentioned earlier, and the harness clips onto the airbox. So now all we have left to do is reconnect the air intake snorkel and then the top cover for the engine. Not too many parts left now. It's worth noting the airflow direction. So in theory, the job is now complete. All we've left to do is do a test start and see if the car runs as normal. Before we do that, we'll check the oil level. Looks like it could do with a little top up. That's pretty good. And see how much oil it now uses after changing out the CCV. Okay, so now let's see if this thing still starts.